Organizations are complex, adaptive human processes. That's our starting point. Organizations are made up of human beings and the relationships that human beings have. My interest is how do you help people who are unsuccessful, who are underrepresented, particularly at the top of the organizations, to gain positions at the top of those organizations in ways that are sustainable. One of the key things, I think, is to help people to understand that in order to be successful, you need to do more than learn the professional skills, the qualifications that people say you need to have in order to be successful. What you need to do is to understand the culture of the organization that you're operating in. And that culture is the culture of the in-group. There's been lots of work on in-groups and out-groups, which show things like the moment somebody perceives themselves as being part of an in-group, the shifts happen in the way in which their brains operate. And they see people who are part of that group in friendlier terms. They see them as having more distinguishing characteristics. They see them as having a common interest. Perversely, they see everybody who is outside of the group. They tend to generalize about them. They don't spot their individual differences. They tend to negatively interpret their behaviors. They don't discriminate between them. So it's really some fascinating stuff. But only focusing on developing the skills and not focusing on the fact that there's a political reality, a small p in organizations, if you're going to be effective in those organizations, you need to engage with. So to be successful at more senior levels in the organization, you need to deal with that cultural dimension. That's the purpose of the bicultural competence model. How do you understand the culture and how do you operate effectively in the culture? Every organization has an explicit culture, which is the culture they talk about. Every organization has an implicit, hidden, or shadow culture. And what the model argues is that people need to become competent in both. And we use the term competence because competence is about what you can do. So it means engaging with other human beings. It means stepping outside of what many people have created, which is a barrier of protection, which has become a barrier of perception to possibility amongst other human beings. So it's to help people to feel sufficiently safe that they can then start to have the kind of conversations with other people that step beyond the superficial. And well facilitated, those can be transformational conversations. People in the in-groups do not always know, in fact, they rarely know that what they are doing is excluding. What they think they are doing is communicating. But they are communicating using their own established patterns of communicating, modes of communicating, meanings of words. So that they might well use exactly the same language as you and I, but they might mean something subtly but significantly different by it. And the only way you learn that is through contact, is through engagement. And typically what we have in our organizations, what I call parallelism, whereas people work next to each other, but never really understand each other. They never really go beneath the surface of their relationships. So part of the work we do around bicultural competence is about helping people have different conversations. But it's also about helping the people who are in the in-group to understand the ways in which they behave, their patterns of communication, their patterns of behavior affect other people so they can reflect upon that and make change to it themselves. I think that's absolutely critical. Because as I said, a lot of people don't realize that the way they're behaving is experienced as excluding by other people. Another dimension of the bicultural competence model is to look at what allows for people to be sustainably successful when they engage in a system which they have not traditionally been part of, which people like them have not traditionally been part of. And by a system now, I'm speaking about the more senior levels of organization. And what we know is that the people who are able to do so sustainably over time, over a period of time, are really good at understanding what the necessary inclusions and beneficial exclusions of behavior are. And by that, they know what they have to do in order to be successful in the organization, and they know what they cannot do. And so they focus their energies on what really has to happen in order to do that. And what helps them to be able to make that distinction is their membership of groups outside of the organization that help give them identity, succor, nurture, inspiration, purpose. So if you look at people, what the research shows is that if you look at people who have been successful over a period of time, they don't draw their strength entirely from the organization. They have sources of energy and nurturing from outside. So they're typically part of professional groups, religious groups, artistic groups, cultural groups, strong family groupings that give them a strong sense of identity, purpose. They have a sense of purpose. And so what they don't just do is focus on becoming good at their job, which is the mistake so many people make. The last dimension which the bicultural competence model tries to address is the fact that if you have been part of a group that has historically been excluded, then you have collaborated in that exclusion. And one of the ways that you have collaborated in that exclusion is that you have started to believe some of the myths about people like yourself. So one of the pieces of work that we help people to do is to reframe how they see themselves. We call this developing ontological security, helping them to think about or to rethink about the past, the story they tell themselves about who they are and how they got to be where they are right now. So rather than having a deficit story, we help them develop an enriched, positive story historically. The metaphor we often use with that is from the work of Edgar Schein of the water lily. He talks about the fact that when you look at individuals, you see this beautiful water lily floating on the surface. But attached to that water lily is a stem that goes through the water. And he likens that to the realities of organizational life and the way the currents of politics and stress and a lot of work to be done can push people around, can test them, can challenge them, and can feed them as well. But what helps that lily at the top to survive the buffering that the stems go through is the fact that underneath all that it is embedded in mud, murky, mucky mud. But that is where the nutrients are. That is where the thing that holds them and binds them and anchors them is. And so people need powerful historical stories, whether just from within their own lifetimes or within their collective lifetimes, about themselves that are positive. So too many people have negative stories about where they come from, and that will affect their ability to be sustainably successful in the organizations. So we work with people around developing powerful sense of ontological security, a powerful sense that they can do it because they have done it, that they have much greater ability than they had perhaps thought they had originally.